Hi, everyone. We are going to start in a few, but I've been told we're waiting for 15 more people to show up. So hopefully they'll show up soon. We're not going to wait for all of them. We will take off when we need to take off.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Also, hopefully after this event, you enjoy it and then also want to come back to more. We have a bunch of events coming up, so feel free to look on our website at those events. Anyways, I'll let you guys take it away from here.
This is Monica, by the way.
Hi.
Okay. Let's see if I can read my script from my phone. So, can everyone hear me? I hope. So, welcome to Standout Storytelling at the Intersection of Brand Strategy and Business Strategy. What goes on? What goes into building an architecture, design, engineering, or construction company with a distinctive brand, and why does it matter? And what's the relationship between brand strategy and business strategy? And how does that influence or impact success for a company? So, we're going to unpack those two questions today. We're also going to talk about what it takes to successfully operate at the intersection of brand strategy and business strategy. And joining me are Daniella Jimenez, Director of Marketing at Guzman Construction Group, and Elisabeth Sporer, architect, coach, executive coach, and founder of SOarch, which is a business strategy consultancy. So, welcome both. So, a brand strategist. Forgot to introduce myself. I'm Lisa Boquiren, brand strategist, architecture and design aficionada, longtime volunteer at AIA San Francisco, and I do these events. Elisabeth actually invited me on behalf of the AIA San Francisco professional practice knowledge community. She said it'll be fun and easy. I said, these things take a lot of work, but here we are. So thank you for inviting me. When I think of brand and the idea of standing out, this is what comes to mind. How do you take this and turn that into this? Branding has its origins in marking cattle to show their ownership as well as to authenticate them. And this is the idea behind brand. So if anyone asks you what was the event about, it's about taking a pile of horseshoes and finding what's distinctive about each of them. And that's what branding and brand building is about. So first, just a quick overview that the uh, Daniela, Elizabeth, and I worked on this slide. It's just an overview of what the components are when you say business strategy and when you say brand strategy. So business strategy is the how, brand strategy is the why. Uh, the text in red is what I would call your static elements, and the text in blue are dynamic. Pretty self-explanatory. So static is foundational, dynamic can change depending on what the needs are. Your logo, your brand statements, those tend to be more foundational. So hopefully you're not changing your logo every 6 months, um, or changing your mission, vision, and values every 6 months. So foundational, your marketing plan has to be then adaptive or responsive. Business strategy is about how, again, you have your business plan. And Elizabeth, this is her particular area of expertise, will explain on this further, and we can ask her questions later. But your business plan with your services, your market sectors, even the firm size, would be more static, and your business development plan would have to be more dynamic as you respond to different things in the market and whatnot. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. I apologize. I not drive. So let's hear from Daniela first, and then Elizabeth. When you hear the word standout and then the event title, what comes to mind?
You know, for me, what's standing out is if you think about it, right? We're all in this room. All of us have our own distinct, unique talents, specific services and expertise that we bring to the table. So we're in a room right now with professionals that can do amazing work, right? The person next to you might be able to design or build a building exactly the way that, you know, if you put yourself on paper, how do you allow yourself to stand out to this potential client, to a developer? Like, what do you do different? What is authentic about you, right? And I think that's where brand really steps in, is how do you brand yourself, not only as a professional, but how you do in your everyday life. So in a room full of professionals, or in a room, you know, full of a bunch of people, how do you separate yourself from, let's call it what it is, the competition? Um, and it's funny that how you bring in, you know, business development, marketing. And I think what's really amazing about marketing is whenever I tell somebody, oh, I'm in marketing, the first thing they say to me is, oh, you must be in sales. And everybody associates sales with marketing. But I think what's the difference between sales and marketing, and this is where it really aligns with how you brand your company, how you brand yourself, is when you are in marketing, you're really selling expertise and you're selling services. Whereas if you're in sales, you're essentially selling a product, right? And so what the client, what the potential developer is buying from you is your brand, the way that you represent yourself. Because, you know, typically if you present yourself in the way that you have branded yourself to the, you know, to this potential client, usually that person can sense or determine how they feel about you probably in the first 5 minutes of that conversation. And let me give you a really quick example. I remember one time a friend of mine was trying to sell a service, and it was a service that I probably could have used. Um, and then she brought in her supervisor. With all that supervisor did was talk about herself and how she became into this business. And then she started talking about a bunch of things I just, you know, I deleted it from my mind. And we, you know, and that's what you have to be careful of, is that when you're pushing your brand, you're pushing yourself, are you being authentic? Are you coming off salesy? Or are you identifying areas where your client has made a personal human connection with you? And so I think that's really what brand is how you present yourself as authentic and how you can connect with the people that you're trying to serve.
Elizabeth, what does stand out mean to you?
Well, usually I'm a business strategist, as Lisa has said, but I'm also an architect. I tell you my story, what standing out means for me. So over the course of 25 plus years, I have been attaching myself to boutique design firms, mostly in the US, but also in Berlin and Germany before that. And they had a big impact on who I am. And I had actually, over the course of the years and decades, to be honest, a lot of impact on who they are and how they do work too, because I be- moved from a designer up to a project manager to a leader to a principal. So there was this give and take happening. At the same time, I was always part of a brand of another firm or of other firms and not me. And what I realized over the decades too is that I enjoy learning incredibly myself. I enjoy training others. I enjoy kind of creating community by training. And I also realized that be, being in the same firm as an operations leader became a small pool in a way. And I missed kind of the community at large and just interacting with other people. And it felt isolating. So, but 10 years ago, I started teaching higher education, and I got a glimpse at that time that teaching adults or training adults could be a business venue for me as an operations person. So the idea to stand out and have my own firm started pretty much around 10 years ago. And it had to do with to detach from the brands that I had co-generated in a way up until that point. So speaking of the brand, like I mentioned, I was part of bigger firms. And then I started actually my own firm 1999 already, a residential firm, and I did residential work, and I was able to gain work and small commercial projects. Did not quite enjoy the small firm setting and went back to the big firm studios at that time because I really wanted the big projects, the big support team around me. I can delegate, I can get things done. I just enjoyed that. So my firm, SOarch, I had the name already branded and I had it registered, went dormant until 2014. At which point I went through coach training and I realized, oh, there's another way of I could possibly create my own business. So revisiting the idea of standing out came back in 2014. I hired a graphic designer to create, so 2014 is EHED. I hired a graphic designer to create my logo and business card, but it took another 3 years to really, really, really detach. And at that point in 2017, I hired Lisa and Michael, who is here as graphic designer, to work with me on my website. And we did a refresh on the logo, on the business card. And there is my business card, as it turned out to be in 2017. And the whole trajectory and how from the idea of why I wanted to be on my own and how I did it, I decided to go on my own. It was the right time. And we put a brand, Lisa and Michael helped me put a brand in place by, we created a website at the time. And that was end of 2017. Then in 2018, I had already clients because I started literally with cold calling. I mean, I got referrals of friends when I spread the word, hey, I'm going to do this on my own. This is what I'm doing. I got work but I also called up my target clients at that time and I got work that way. But then we added monthly newsletters. So I found a way to convey my stories, the stories that I found by working with my clients into a larger platform. So I did a lot of research as to who are my target clients and how do I find them? How do I reach them? Because you had to get email address to be as simple as that. So I spent a lot of time researching at the time and invested also in creating the stories and refining them into emails that we send out. And then in 2019, by that time, I had gone through a program with AIA San Francisco here, a mentorship program that I mentored like a bunch of mostly international professionals. I found it very energizing and I decided, hey, their stories should be heard by others. So we created the first event that was about international professionals. And at the same time, Lisa and I brainstormed about that. We created an event about entrepreneurship. So I invited some of my first clients to really tell their stories also in an event. Both were very successful. And it created for me, in fact, an approach that have been repeating since. So I sent out monthly newsletters and I create 2 to 4 events per year that I usually we look at what kind of topics are really relevant to my clients, to the community that I'm in, and try to bring people together talking about that.
So for those of you in the audience who are working at a firm and thinking of going off on your own, or for those of you who have just gone off on your own, I think Elisabeth's story of the why and the how will be resonant and also relatable, because it can be daunting when you think about detaching yourself from some of the companies that Elisabeth worked with, for example, which are very established brands, and your identity is tied, your professional identity is tied to that brand. And so I think your example is very inspiring. It makes for a very good case study. I will say that Elisabeth was not, when we first started working together, you weren't very comfortable doing events. But
No,
but so part
she
of
talked me into it.
well, part of the strategy, I think, to Daniella's point, is to find you be authenticity has to do with finding what works for you and what you're comfortable with. And so if going to cocktail parties, going to conferences, and putting yourself in front of people is your thing, that's great. But if it's not, there are plenty of other ways to do it, as Elisabeth has shown.
As an introverted, I really embrace that strategy, and it has worked out so far rather well for me. I sent out I reposted a link today on LinkedIn about introvert leaders, and I found it. I feel like so appreciative that there are people out there that recognize, and not every leader has to be an extrovert. You can lead just as much. I'm not shy, but I don't like to talk constantly with others. I prefer to have my privacy more often. Anyway.
Find what suits you. So let's go from Elisabeth sharing on the why and the how of creating a new brand for her consultancy to hearing from Daniella about amplifying the story of an existing brand. How did you go about laying the foundation, if you will, for Guzman Construction Group?
Yeah. So, well, the brand, the logo, everything's on paper that I guess you would consider static or existed before me. So, and it's funny how, Elisabeth, you bring up the topic of how do you detach yourself from being known for the brands that you had built that were larger firms to standing out separately from your own. And it's interesting because the founder of Guzman Construction Group, Miguel Guzman, he started the same way. He was the president and CEO. He's the president and CEO of Guzman Construction. He started 10 years ago. But prior to that, he had been with a one of the larger general construction firms in San Francisco. And that's where he built his name, his career. So the public, in terms of clients, developers, even though they had followed him when he started this venture on his own, people still associated him with his previous firm. And I think it's really, it's actually easy to do that because before I came to Guzman Construction, I had worked with some larger general contractors, and a lot of folks knew me associated with those larger firms. And when I had taken the leap and went to this, what they would consider a smaller general contracting firm, people were like, really, you're going to go there? That's small. And if, just by a show of hands, how many of you actually work for one of the larger firms, either a design firm or an engineering firm? It would be considered large. And how many of you are maybe on your own or Yeah. And how many work for maybe like a boutique kind of? All right. So have you guys noticed it? Do you notice the difference in terms of how you have to stand out in comparison to being with a larger firm versus being with a smaller firm? Right. So you notice the difference. So when I came to Guzman, um, everything had existed. They had projects. They were probably already 8 years in existence. But what drew me to the firm was how value aligned the company was with me. And I remember I was working for one of the larger contractors. They were global. And I was just ready for something different. I needed to be drawn to something that resonated and what connected with me. And when I interviewed with him, we probably had a conversation that lasted 45 minutes just on Zoom. And when I hung up the computer, when I hung up the call, I had already typed up my resignation letter. That's how much his story resonated with me. And so when I came over to Guzman Construction Group, I needed to find a way. I was like, wow, you know, a lot of people need to hear this story, because if it got me to jump ship and take a risk, there's going to be clients, there's going to be employees that are also going to take a risk and be inspired by the story. And he's trying to build a business. He doesn't know how to go out there and tell a story. So I think what I really wanted to do was, you know, get it out there to existing, you know, potential clients, potential employees. Jump on this ship, get on this train with us, because when we're taking off right now, you don't want to try to get on the ship when it's already taken off. So what I really wanted to do was I wanted Guzman to become the next household name in general contracting. How do you do that? It takes more than a website and a logo, because let's be honest, we are surrounded by so many great contracting firms in San Francisco. And how do you take this 10-year-old company and how do you have them stand out against the Swinnertons, the Webcors, you know, the Turners? I mean, these are the big giants. And when you can get to a point where those are actually your competition, that's when you know you've done your job. And so I think one of the best compliments that I've received since being with Guzman since 23 is I'll go up to developers and architects, and they're just like, wow, we see your logo everywhere. That's how I know I'm doing my job. That's how you know you are standing out. Because if people can look at your logo and associate it with, hey, I think they do building. That's just, you know, that's a step, you know, you're telling the story the right way. And I think what makes the experience what makes it easy for me to tell the story is because I'm actually aligned with the founder's vision. If you join a firm or a team and you're not aligned with what they represent, it's going to be a little bit harder for you to sell what you can do, right? So I think that's what makes, you know, being able to put a brand out there is, you know, whether you're going to be doing it as yourself, you really have to stand for what you believe in, and what you're doing is really going to deliver something to the clients. And I think that's just what makes, you know, storytelling so magical, is because the way that you tell the story can really cause, you know, a feeling of connection with these clients. And ultimately, if you think about why you're choosing a firm, why you're choosing even maybe like an airline, or, you know, we were just having a joke in here about, if you're going to choose an airline, are you going to choose Frontier or Spirit, or are you going to go with Delta? Because those have left you with some type of feeling, some type of emotion, some type of connection. And you just got to make sure that that brand resonates with the audience, regardless of who you're talking to. It has to give that type of feeling, that reaction.
Now, I want to do a follow-up question, Daniela, in terms of the founder's vision, which a lot of small firms their business strategy is shaped and influenced heavily by a founder's vision. How is that playing out at Guzman Construction Group at this point in the history?
Well, you know, we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, a decade, you know, and, you know, when we were planning this whole campaign around 10 years, and if you think about 10 years in building, it's a huge milestone for us. But, you know, as you know, there's been companies that have been around for 100 years. But for us, we really wanted to focus that campaign around the story. So what we did, and Michael, thank you so much for helping us put together that brand, that storytelling, is we wanted to utilize a social media campaign. of 10 years leading to a decade. And for 10 days leading up to the celebration, we posted a very special milestone. We told a story from the first project, the first office, which was a desk and I think a superintendent's workshop in the back, to now us having our own office on Folsom Street, that we own the building, to the clients that we've worked with, the employees. We did a feature on employee number 2 who's still with us. And then when we actually hosted the celebration in San Francisco, I was completely overwhelmed with the amount of support and the guest count that was there. I mean, every client that we had invited, when you throw a party, you're like, oh my God, what if nobody shows up? It got to the point of, oh my God, there's too many people here. We got to start turning them away. But it was a great time. And I think what it showed is that these clients who showed up, they were aligned with the founder's vision. They felt something from the story and they wanted to continue to be aligned with that story because they felt connected to it. And so, and I think that's what, was such an honor for me to come work with him and tell that story so authentically, because it wasn't hard. All he had to do was tell me how it started, and I was able to put it in a way that, not having to fabricate something that wasn't true, but having to have it connect with clients, employees, partners. Because even though, like, say, for example, we're trying to attract talent, right? The way that you talk to a potential employee is not going to be the same way that you talk to a developer you're trying to build a building to. But you do have to let them know that your values are the same. Because if I'm trying to attract a potential project manager and I'm saying, yeah, we do all of this and we do all of this and this is what we stand for, just to get them through the door, but I'm telling the client something completely different, your brand is lost. Your story is washed. You have to make sure that what you're saying out there is consistent. And I think that was truly a testament to how we were doing our job, was the amount of people that showed up, the engagement that we had on social media. It was a big success, and we're looking forward to the next 10 years.
It's great. By the way, if you have questions, we have Q&A cards that you should have received. And I think Monica at some point will be walking around collecting the questions. So Daniella alluded to story selling. So I coined this triple S. So storytelling, story selling. A lot of us are storytellers. Some are better than others. The better ones are able to sell their story. And the expert ones are able to scale their story. So that's the third S. And by scaling, it implies knowing who your audience is, knowing what maybe part of the message to send that audience, where and how. And I want to go back to Elisabeth in terms of story selling and scaling, because you have, because of your strategy for your brand with your e-newsletters in particular, you have reached clients from on both coasts. So while Guzman is very local, very hyper local, if you will, Elisabeth's strategy has enabled her to reach the entire country. Talk about the e-newsletter as far as your business development is concerned.
Yeah, sure. So going back in timeline, I mentioned that in 2019, I did the first events. So 2020, I decided to reach out to Southern California because I felt like San Francisco, again, like I mentioned, I was looking for a way to reach more people and interact with more people when I created my own brand, when I split off from the firms. So I felt after like 3 years, 2 years, that San Francisco was almost getting too small. So I was reaching out to Southern California, and I started doing 4 events in 2020 in Los Angeles, and gained actually a lot of clients in the Southern California area, including San Diego. And then when the pandemic hit, honestly, with the technology change and communication, I was able to reach out nationwide. And I have now clients on both sides of the country, and mostly on the coast, not inland, but definitely, and I have more than 50 clients. So I started in 2017, have over 50 clients. And in terms of how I got the 2 aspects to KPIs, key performance indicators. When you do marketing, you have to always prove how successful you are. And I track my own marketing, my own success constantly. So I have been adding a lot of users or my audience. So I've done a lot of research on how to create an ad to Southern California, then the East Coast, then the Boston area. And I know exactly what, which of my stories resonate with my audience. And I cater my stories around that because the stories that are interesting for the San Francisco Bay Area are not quite the same like what Boston or what Seattle might be interested in. I mean, Seattle is similar to the Bay Area, but Boston, New York has definitely a different kind of flavor. And so I know what interests, I know how many of my users open my emails, whether they click on links, whether they re-engage, whether they have questions, and I cater my stories towards that. I mean, I'm always talking about the stories that are relevant to me. I'm not telling stories just to please somebody else. There are stories that are relevant to me and hopefully to my some of my clients. And I attract clients that are interested in the same stories, but I can slice and dice it by geographically that I send a certain newsletter or a type to a small audience or to a audience of a certain kind of size firm or type of market, what the firm does. And I've been creating I have been creating my client list or generating and editing it. About 50% of my clients have come through word of mouth, referrals, friends, clients. But the other 50% have actually been attracted to me and my work through my newsletters and my events. So the stories and what I say and how I present it is relevant to them, and they call me and have hired me. So I'm very happy to again to see that this form of communication allows me to do outreach and grow rather than having to go to conferences and chat up people. I mean, I do events, and honestly, it took quite some time to be comfortable to do events and not completely freak out. But it's manageable. The stress is manageable. I had my first concert a weekend ago. I was so freaked out, but it did go okay.
So let's end on a high note on story selling and have Daniela walk us through an example of how the story was told and sold.
Yeah, so this is a great example of how you can stand out against the competition. So, and I picked this project. Oops. I picked this project specifically because it had a lot of press. We had been tracking it for a couple of years, but 1979 Mission, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but it's right there on the 16th Street and Mission BART. It was originally named Monster in the Mission. And so, you know, a lot, I think it was originally going to be developed by Maximus, and then it had been protested. They were saying you're gentrifying the neighborhood. And so that's what we knew going in. We knew that there were going to be a lot of people who had some type of stake in this product, some type of voice. And so what did we know? You know, we knew that it's the Mission District. They don't like to consider themselves just a neighborhood. They like to be known as being a legacy, right? Because it's the constituents in the Mission District, they take a lot of pride in what goes in there and how it's going to be developed and how it's going to be built for the people. So what we found out was two mission-based, Latino-led developers, Mission Housing and Meta, were coming together to develop over 300 units of affordable housing right there on 16th Street and Mission, right on top of the BART station. So we knew that they wanted more than just a builder who was going to be going in there and making a mess and pissing off all of the neighbors. They wanted somebody who was going to come in as a partner. So we knew, we're like, well, how do we stand out against, because we knew every GC in San Francisco was going to be going after it. Some really strong ones. And one of the top contenders that we knew was the competition had built the building right across the street. So how do we stand out? How do we tell the story to this developer, to this neighborhood, to this design team that we're different? And so, you know, what was the strategy? What did we have to do? How did we have to align our brand with this developer, with this client, to let them know that, hey, we're the partner for you? You know, we had to listen. You know, we knew that other builders in this city were going to be able to do exactly that, what we say that we can do. And They've probably been doing it for a lot longer. And so we had to identify some strategic partnerships. We knew that Guzman's only, at the time, we're only 9 years old. They knew the capacity that we had, so we had to identify a partner. So we ended up partnering with Miguel's previous firm because we wanted the client to know that, hey, not only are you going to get this authentic, builder that actually cares about this neighborhood, but we're going to be partnering with a company that has the backing, the history, the force, and that should help you hopefully sleep a little bit better at night. So what did we have to do when we were telling that story? So when Michael and I were working, we were trying to figure out, how do we make this proposal authentic? How do we have them, when they look at and they open the first page, how do we allow them to feel good about what they're about to read? And so we kind of let our JV partner take the lead on the first cover, and great, when they sent it to us, it definitely looked like something that was copied and pasted. So it was a project in the Mission, nowhere close to where the site was. Yeah, it was done by, a developer, and, the developer had worked on it, but it just seemed so static. It was definitely one that they had pulled off the shelf. And I remember asking Michael, our creative manager, I said, how do we change this up? And he said, one of the first things developers look at when they receive a proposal is a cover. If you look at it, it's kind of like how many of you have reviewed or put together RFPs, proposals? And how many of you actually think that the cover is one of the more important things to put on there? Because it's the first thing you see. So we wanted to make sure that what we were putting out there was something that was going to resonate, but at the same time not lose who we were from a branding standpoint. So what did we do here? So Michael designed this really great cover, and there were snapshots of 16th Street, Mission BART. He put in there just active community. He actually activated the cover where you're actually looking at it and you're like, wow, this is what this community could look like if it gets built by us. And it was great because when we had put together the proposal, outside of just qualifications and checking the box, we knew that we weren't going to score as high as the other GCs because, let's face it, they've been building things bigger for a little bit longer. So where did we get the edge? And where we got the edge, believe it or not, was our personal connections to the Mission District. We told them that we were going to hire from the neighborhood. We were able to list every single agency where we were going to sort and source talent. We let them know that Miguel, our CEO, grew up 2 blocks from the site. Our superintendent went to high school in the Mission. We had a team that had built on top of BART stations before. So we did let them know that we were qualified to do it, but at the same time, they felt better knowing that when the neighborhood came, if there was ever a protest, we were going to be standing there with them. So we let them know what the message was. We're going to be your partner in this. We're not just going to be the builder that comes in here and, it's going to collect a fee. We're going to be here from pre-construction, from entitlements to all of these things. All of your problems are now our problems. And that translated clearly in the proposal. So even though the messaging had to be tailored specifically to this client, we made sure that we utilized our strengths, our personal connections to make it resonate with them. Oh, and we won it.
So I don't know where Monica, does anyone have questions that you want to pass on? While I'm going down the aisle here, oh, there's Monica. My glasses are not, I want to ask Elisabeth and Daniella, the myth of the cold call, because we talked about this, we had a conversation about this. Tell the audience your opinion, your thoughts, and maybe your experience about cold calling. Elisabeth, you want to start?
Sure. I make my money with creating business plans for other clients, with A&D firms. And I can tell you, even at day one or before day one, I had a business plan for what I am going to do, meaning I had laid out who am I going to work with, what my fees are going to be. I had an agreement in place. I had the tools in place. I was ready to roll right away I had my elevator speech in place, and I used that elevator speech to do the to do the cold calls, and they were successful. But I had to do all these. I needed to get the plan together. I needed to have a brand idea together, and then I could do the cold calls. They were fine, but they're taxing. They're actually intense, and you can do it for a limited time, but then that kind of, I felt it was wearing off, and that's when I started to expand my strategy. But I think as a new business, I can see that it may be necessary.
With the preparation that you mentioned.
With the
Yeah.
preparation, you have to have a business plan, and you need to have funding in place. I had 6 months of funding in place, so I had a deadline as to how much time I gave myself to even try it out and win a certain level of income. And then if I wouldn't do that, I would look for something else. But I was within 3 months of the income level that I wanted to have. The combination of my coaching experience and my operations experience really did sell, and I reached out to the right clients.
Yeah.
I did the early events I did were all about business strategy, the blueprint for success. And I'm still telling all my clients the same story. You need to have a solid financial foundation to begin with, and you need to invest equally, not equal in terms of quantity, but somewhat in terms of quality into the brand, into operations, into accounting and finance, and into the practice and design. So don't just go out and design and think everything else is falling in place. You need to invest in all these things: time, money, resources, energy, to really get to a point where things, they're not automatic, never automatic, never ever, but where they kind of just kind of become a habit without thinking, I guess.
Hey, Jill, how did you come up with your first cold call list?
Literally the first list that I put together were all the firms that I admired, that I was at some point considering working with, working for. They were of a size that I found compelling. And so they did interesting design work. They were of a certain size. And I knew often people in the leadership there, so I could just pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, I just left XYZ. I'm actually looking for, and I would like to consult or work as a consultant, and explained what I'm able to do. And are you interested in having a coffee? It was literally just not even saying, do you hire me, but let's have a coffee. And that generated conversations, and they did lead to work, actually. Yeah.
So not quite a cold call, not ice cold.
Not ice
Um,
cold.
Daniela has a similar cold call adjacent story. Do you mind sharing?
Oh, I hate cold calling. Actually, believe some trivia. One of my first jobs when I was in college was I was a telemarketer for the San Francisco Chronicle, and worst job ever. I think I lasted maybe 2 weeks. Uh, the amount, but and the thing is, like, when somebody like that calls your house, or somebody like that calls you, they can just hang up on you. I got hung up on, yelled at, cussed out. It was so I have a little bit of PTSD about cold calling, but I think what social media and technology has done is made cold calling maybe just a little bit easier. So where you can kind of a little bit like warm calling. Our CEO, when he brought me on board, he came up to me and he said, I have been trying to get in front of this client for the past few years. He goes, and I send them these brochures, I send them these quals, I would look at them and I was like, this is why they're not answering you, because they look like this. And he's just like, you got to get me a meeting with them. And so first thing you do, I think, when that's the magic of the internet, right, is you go to LinkedIn, you go to their website, and you're like, okay, who are these primary decision makers? So you scroll down the list, you're like, oh, this is the senior vice president of real estate development. Who do I know? Who do we have contacts in common? Look down, we actually had maybe about 10 contacts in common. A few were just maybe just business, that I couldn't really call that person, but I realized that I had one of my mentors in affordable housing was a direct connection with her. So I gave her a call and I said, hey, how well do you know this person? And she goes, actually, we go to Housing California every year. I love her. We both live in the East Bay. I go, can you please give me an introduction? And she gave an email introduction. And within less than 24 hours, she had responded to me. And Miguel was like, how did you do that? And I said, well, You know, I didn't send that brochure that you sent her, but you know, basically what I said, you know, I got a friendly connection. And I think that's what's also a form of branding. That would, you know, if my friend wasn't comfortable with the way that I had branded myself as a professional, I don't think she would have given me an introduction. You know, so how you brand yourself at a company does follow you. And this was a past coworker of mine. So clearly she had a great experience with me. Still one of my good friends, great mentor. But had I not left that great impression with her, had I not branded myself as an authentic professional, she, you know, she's not going to risk her contact, her relationship with this person just because I want to potentially do a deal with her firm. And this person came to our party, had a great time, has been, you know, we've been able to bid on a couple of their projects, and it's opened the doors to so many opportunities. So just remember, you know, it's just beyond like how you are at work, but when you leave that firm, you never know who you're going to who you're going to need from that firm to give you an introduction to somebody else. So I like to think as brand is more than just, and I hate using this word influencer because it's used so much, but influencers say it best, you know, this is their brand, this is who they build because they're constantly selling their talents themselves like out there, because how they brand themselves out there is how they get business, and how you brand yourself out there could lead to the next business venture, next project, next job. Hopefully not your boss is here and I'm saying that to you, but you know, the way that you brand yourself is going to follow you through so many different ways through your career and your professional life. So just always be mindful of that.
I can only underline that. I mean, like I said, a lot of my work is coming through word of mouth, and it still goes back that to colleagues I worked with maybe 25 years ago that might call me now and get me engaged. And the first cold calls, some of them were real cold calls, but a lot of them were like favors, so connecting with somebody I knew or had met at some point throughout my professional life. And just by knowing me, they were willing to talk to me and meet and have the coffee and see whether they could help me.
Just a quick question. What are the last 2 or 3 events that you hosted? Somebody's looking for more detail.
So I've been hosting in January an event with Lisa as a speaker as well about business development, which was not recorded, unfortunately. It was a live event, was well attended, and we talked about the different strategies and ways of how one as an A&D firm does business development. Before that, I had an event in the spring 2024 about leadership. And it was more about my coaching side of my business than anything. So we did a lot of self-assessments and figuring out what kind of personality type one is and what kind of behavior patterns may follow. I've done also a presentation about financial management, firm financial management, last year and the year before. One of my favorites, always comes across, people love it. It kind of really explains from a bird's eye perspective what to look at when you own a firm. What are the KPIs, the key performance indicators? What do you need to really know about that? And I do a similar one about project management, which brings it down more to the level of a person 10 years into the firm, but what kind of financials do they need to know and understand and follow? And one of my favorite presentations, which you can find on my website, is actually about business strategy, the blueprint for success. Yeah, I connect with me and I show you the link so you can look at it again if you want to.
So we're going to end on this final question. We'll start with you, Daniela. How do you prioritize which story to tell, especially if the founder's vision can be applied to so many services at a range of scales?
Oh, that's a tough question. Um, how do you oh, excuse me, how do you prioritize those stories? I mean, it goes by, it depends who the client is. It depends who the audience is. I can give you a great example. You know, we have 3 markets that we serve. affordable housing, education, healthcare. And the reason why we stay in these sectors is because all of these markets align with what we want to do, which is grow better, healthier, stronger communities. So that even though what I'm going to say or what we're going to pitch to a healthcare developer is not going to be the same story that we tell to our affordable housing clients, what we do want to make sure that we're focusing on is, we're here to solve your problems. We know this is your problem. Um, we're going to be your partner through it. And I think it's a lot easier for us to stay within these three buckets of clients because all of them ultimately serve a purpose, right? Is to better, better facilities, better communities. So our messaging doesn't really have to shift that much. And I think that's why, and actually Miguel said something really great when we were on a call the other day. Not every client is going to be for you, and we're not going to be for every client. So I think that's when you have to start really thinking about what does your brand represent? Do they align with a client? Do you want to get into bed with a client that doesn't align socially, strategically with you just because you need the work? Because it could end up biting you in the butt later. Or, so I think that's one of the things that's really great about joining, Guzman Construction is we know what we do well. We want to work with these clients because they are aligned with what we want to do. And I think that's, really how we identify prioritizing the story. It really is client focused, but we don't have to shift too much because our clients are all pretty aligned with us.
Yeah, and if you look at the way I approach it with clients, for example, if you look at your brand like a book and you have different chapters in that book, but it's still part of that book. And I let clients know I'm not a magician. So I'm going to get your brand to the best brand it can possibly be. But there has to be something there to begin with. It can't be a cut and paste brand. But if you look at your brand in totality and break up the stories, and literally, even this is a very literal example, you're about your firm, 500 words. It gets distilled to 75 words. Then it gets distilled to a hashtag. Then you start to see, okay, this is who I'm about. And it's a very simple exercise, but it does require am I at the 500 word level? And then let's keep drilling down so that when you leave, you say Guzman Construction Group community. When you say SOarch, it's transforming businesses. It's transformative, really, what you do for on a yeah. Do you want to? Does anyone have any final thoughts before we wrap up? Oh, question. What is the one thing you want people to take away?
Just I think the best thing that we can take away from being, from this brand discussion is remember just to be authentic. Remember what your team, what your sole business, what it was really built on. Because it's going to be a lot easier for you to tell the story if you're not constantly changing it.
Yeah, I tag on to that. I always find it most important, really do know who you are and what really matters to you, your values and how you prefer to interact and work with others. If you're aware of that and can communicate that to others, it makes life so much easier. And in the bigger picture, the business plan, gosh, you need to know who you are. You need to know what you do. You need to know why you do it, and you need to know who you and how and who you do it with. And if you have answers to those questions, you are most likely on a pretty solid starting point foundation and some funding to get you going.
And you will start to stand out. On that note, we want to end this and leave room for anyone who wants to talk informally with Daniella or Elisabeth to do so. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.